If you could say in one word what you want more of in life, what would that be? That is a question that was the base of a study where 1,600 people were asked that one simple question. You could say in one word what you want more of in life, what would that be? I took that study and then they followed up with some questions to understand their one word, to understand what they meant by it, to understand what they were trying to overcome or change in their life by that. And I want to give you the top 10 answers to that in reverse order. Number 10, passion. People felt they couldn't be successful at what they did if they weren't passionate about it. So they either wanted to find something new to be passionate about or to be given passion for what they were already doing. Number 9, stability. And this was most people saying, where I'm at in life now is unstable. It's changing constantly. And I want to move on to something where I can find some stability. Would stop changing so much. Number 8, confidence. They proclaimed that they felt like they had nothing to offer where they were in life. And they wanted the confidence to be able to say, I have something to offer to my workplace, to my family, to whomever. Fulfillment. And they said they wanted to use their potential. They didn't feel like they were meeting their potential. And that would bring them fulfillment in life. If they could do more, if they could be more, if they were doing more of what they felt they should be doing. Number 6, balance. They wanted to balance things like career and family and to have more time and more flexibility to be able to do the things they wanted to do. Number 5, joy. And they specifically said they wanted to find the right role, position, or relationship that would bring them joy. Number 4, peace. And the people that answered that said, we feel overwhelmed with life. And we need peace. Number 3, freedom. They felt like the things in life, whether it was their family, their career, whatever it was, constrained them, held them down, held them back. And they wanted freedom to be able to be and do the things that they wanted to be and do. Number 2, money. Not a surprise, right? Surprise is not number 1. But most people said not just they wanted more money, they wanted to be able to do more of the things they wanted to do, and they felt that money was the obstacle in them doing that. Number 1 was happiness. Now here's the interesting thing about happiness. Happiness was the term that was used in this study as people saying, I don't know what I need. I just know I'm afraid. And I know that I'm hurting, and I just want whatever's going to change that and make me feel better about my life. Now, I find some interesting things about these answers. Number 1, a lot of them don't actually solve any of their problems, do they? A lot of them actually bring more problems sometimes. Number 2, we know that Jesus is really the answer for most of those. Most of those things were found in Jesus. And if they found more of Him, they would find more things like joy and peace, fulfillment, balance. They would find all those things that they were looking for. And I think what stood out to me most of all was that the majority of people didn't know what they needed more of in life. They knew they needed something. Nobody said we don't need anything. They knew they needed something, but they didn't know what that something was. We're here today because we do. We know who we need more of in life and who will bring us those things that our hearts are seeking, who will give us a stable place to stand on, who will balance the things that are out of balance, who will bring us all these things that our hearts and our lives desire. We know that we need more of Jesus in our lives. And so I asked this question to myself as I was reading this study. What was it In Scripture, in the Gospels, when people came to Jesus, what were they looking for? Because they were all looking for more of something too. They were all looking for something from Him. Nobody ever came to Him, rarely, I don't want to say no one, rarely did anybody ever come to Him just to worship Him. Hey, we just want to hang out with you. But they were looking for something. And as I thought about that, far and away, there's a number one to that. The number one thing that most people came and looked to Jesus for, what they wanted when they came to Him, and that was healing. No, I think in truth, a lot of the people in this study, the truth is they were actually looking for the same things. They were looking for healing in their life too. They were proclaiming, there's something wrong in my workplace, in my family, in my heart. And I need something that's going to fix that, that's going to change that, that's going to make it better. And they were searching for that. The people that came to Jesus were searching for the same thing. Most of them weren't just looking for a change to their physical problem, but they were looking for the change to their life that the change to that problem would bring. So as we think of, what does it mean for me to say, I want more of Jesus in my life? I want to start here. We're going to look throughout the Gospels the next few weeks to ask ourselves, how did people come to Him? How did they find more of Him? What did they find? So we can understand what we can find more of in Him. But today I want to look at this passage in Matthew chapter 8. We're going to look here because in just 17 verses, we get 4 different instances of healing. And we see 4 different groups of people or individuals that come to Jesus for healing. And we're going to ask the same questions of each of these 4 different people. We're going to ask, who is healed? How do they come to Jesus for healing? How do they ask for healing? How does Jesus heal them? And then what happens after that healing? And in answering those questions, and you can look in the Gospel of Matthew with me to help answer those questions for yourself. But as we look and answer those questions, I believe they will reveal to us how we can come to Jesus for healing and some of what we can expect to find more of Him in our lives in this way. So let's start in chapter 8 with verse 1. And here, Dennis read for us starting with verse 5. We're going to start with the first story here, which is in verse 1. Verse 1 to 4. And the Gospel tells us, large crowds followed Jesus as He came down the mountainside. And suddenly a man with leprosy approached Him and knelt before Him. Lord, the man said, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. Jesus reached out and touched him. I'm willing, he said, be healed. And instantly the leprosy disappeared. Then Jesus said to him, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. And this will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed. So who comes to Jesus for healing? We have a leper, a man with leprosy. And understand that leprosy, a lot of people that the Bible tells us had leprosy, didn't necessarily have actual leprosy. This was a term they used to describe almost any kind of skin disease. Because Jesus didn't say, go to the dermatologist first, right? That didn't exist. They didn't know that. So let's say you had eczema, something like that. That would probably be labeled as leprosy. And if any of you have had those kind of skin conditions, those rashes, and there's no medication or help for them, they don't go away, right? They linger. And so if you were someone like this man who had leprosy, you immediately were unclean because of this rash. If you were a Jewish man or woman, you had this, you would be unclean. And what that meant is you had to essentially move out of your house because you couldn't be around your own family or else you would make them unclean. Couldn't go to the temple or the synagogue because you were unclean, so you couldn't practice your faith anymore. You couldn't go anywhere around anyone. In fact, they were required to wear clothes that they tore, and they were required to have unkept hair so that they looked like somebody who was an outcast. And if you came close to me, if I had leprosy and you came close to me, I had to shout that I was unclean so that you knew. They had to wear this on their sleeve. They couldn't hide it. They couldn't pretend there was something else. They had to make known to everybody that they were unclean. Because if you were touched by me, or even came anywhere close, some said, even if the shadow of somebody with leprosy fell on you, you were now unclean. So you got to stay away, or else my uncleanliness is transferred to you, and you have to go through all these rituals to be made clean again. So this leper comes to Jesus for healing. And how does he come? Well, it tells us here that he approaches Jesus. He comes to Jesus. Now, there's some question here as whether people were around or not. Verse 1 tells us that large crowds were following Jesus. But then Jesus tells him not to tell anybody. And that's kind of a silly thing to tell him if he did this in front of a crowd of people, right? So, probably have here, Matthew throughout his gospel emphasizes the crowds, especially in the beginning part. And he's probably emphasizing that there are people always coming to Jesus for healing. This leper probably finds an instance where he can come privately and he can find the healing that he's looking for. He approaches Jesus. Now, he's not supposed to do that. Remember, he's supposed to shout that he's unclean. But it's important for us to note, the leper comes to Jesus. He recognizes he needs Jesus. He's in a hopeless situation that cannot be changed, and the only hope he has is to come to Jesus. So how does he ask for healing? Well, he does two things. The first thing is, it says he kneels. That is a posture of humility. That is a posture that says, you are greater than I am. I'm not worthy to be standing in your presence. It's acknowledging that they are in a higher position than you. But then he says this. The leper doesn't ask. He doesn't say, Jesus, could you please heal me? You know, often we come to Jesus and we ask for things in prayer, and we come in such a way that we say, you know, Jesus, if you have enough time and you can maybe possibly think about doing this in my life, we so hedge our bets. Like, I'm going to ask it in a way that when I don't get it, that it's because of that, right? He says this, Lord, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. That is a proclamation of faith. That he believes, he knows Jesus has the power to heal him. That Jesus has the power to change his life. This is not a question of whether he believes that Jesus can heal him. He knows Jesus has the power and ability. That is not the question for us. If you have a problem today, if you have a sickness today, if you have some struggle today, it doesn't matter what it is. The question that you have is not, can Jesus change this in my life? He has the power and the ability to change whatever you face. But the leper understood there is a question still. And that was his will. If you are willing. See, what that statement tells us is this. If God has the power to do something, He is not obligated to do it. Just because we believe God has the power to do something doesn't mean He has to do it. Instead, what this leper has prayed is for God's will to be done in his life. If you are willing, Lord, I want what you want to be done. Which is exactly how we should pray when we come to God. It's not a question of God if you think you could. No, God, I know that you can. If it's in your will, can you change this in my life? And friends, sometimes the answer is no. It's not God's will what you're asking for. The Apostle Paul comes to God and he says, for a thorn in his flesh to be removed. We don't know what that thorn was. We don't know exactly what he meant. There's lots of guesses. But whatever it was, God, all three times, tells the Apostle Paul, no. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. In other words, Paul, I have a purpose for the struggle in your life. And I'm using it for something that's greater than you. Sometimes we don't understand why God's will is what it is. We don't understand why the answer is no. We just trust that God knows more than we do and God understands more than we do. Yet we still believe that he can do what we've asked him to do. The important thing is we ask if it's in your will. So how does Jesus heal him? Because Jesus says, I am willing. It is in my will to heal you. How does he heal him? He touches him. That's an important thing. Because this leper has not been touched by somebody else since the day he was declared a leper. He has not had anybody who was willing to reach out and put their hand anywhere on him for weeks, months, years, a lifetime, however long he's had this struggle. Why is Jesus willing to do that? Well, see, because if anybody else came and touched the leper, what happened? He made them unclean. That's not how Jesus works. Instead of the leper making him unclean, he makes the leper clean. He changes the leper's life instead of the leper changing his life. See, that's why we can bring our sickness and our problems and our struggles to Jesus. You might not be able to bring them to each other because they're too much or they're too great, or they might burden you. They might affect somebody else in a negative way, but not Jesus. We don't bring our problems and they change him. We bring our problems and he changes us. He touches him. Because Jesus isn't just interested in healing him. Because go back, what does the leper ask? If you're willing, you can heal me and make me clean. I need to be clean so I can go home and be with my family. I need to be made clean so I can go back to my life. I need to be made clean so I can be a normal, functioning human being in this society. But Jesus doesn't do that. Because that's not what he needs. That's what happens after the healing. What happens after? Jesus says, don't tell anybody and go see a priest. And Jesus tells him that because he doesn't want him to go to the priest and say, Jesus healed me, I'm clean. We've seen that happen in other healing stories, and then their healing is rejected or questioned, or there's a problem with it, right? Jesus doesn't want to be an obstacle to this man being able to go back to his life, to being restored. The way he could be made clean is to go to the priest and be declared clean. Jesus knows that's the best route for him, because Jesus isn't interested in just healing his problem. Jesus is interested in restoring his life. He wants to make him whole again. And just getting rid of the leprosy doesn't do that. There's more that has to be done. Jesus isn't just interested in the problem that you have, that you bring to him. He's interested in taking care of your entire life, in restoring you, and making you who he created you to be. So we move on to verse 5. It's asked the same questions about this passage. This is what Dennis read us about, in his version said a centurion. Yours might say Roman officer. And that's who's healed. A servant, which is a nice way to say a slave. He had a slave that he brought. Now, we know this, we deduce that this Roman officer is a centurion by what he says in this passage, that he is in charge of other people. And so already we have somebody, it's kind of like the leper. It's somebody that's not supposed to come to Jesus. He is a Roman, so he's a Gentile. He is a part of the Roman army, so that is Israel's enemy. That's who the Messiah is supposed to be fighting against, not working with. And so he brings his servant here, his slave, and that is very different from Roman culture. The Romans did not value their slaves. In fact, normally they would have said, just let them die and go buy a new one. But there's something different about this centurion that enables him to come to Jesus. And he, in his position, could have gone to a lot of places and could have sought help in a lot of different ways. But he knows, as we see here, he has faith that knows that Jesus is the only answer to his servant's problem. And so as he comes to Jesus, how do they come to Jesus for healing? Well, the young servant never comes to Jesus, does he? Jesus never meets him. Doesn't go to his house. He doesn't see him. He doesn't touch him. He doesn't talk to him. The healing happens from whatever distance they are away from where they are, from where he is, from the servant is. He doesn't see him at all. And some people in your life are not going to be able to come to Jesus. You're going to have to bring them. They don't have the strength. They don't have the ability. They don't have the knowledge. Whatever it is, you're going to need to bring them to Jesus. And so I want to remind you of this. I gave you this challenge last week and told you I would remind you again this week. That's why you have this little card in here. This is a 21-day prayer challenge I gave you. I gave you a read through the Bible challenge that we're going to find more Jesus that way. And this prayer challenge is going to help you too. And here's the challenge. The question up top is for you. I gave you a week to figure it out. If you weren't here last week, you got a day. Okay? Who are you praying for? I just want you to pray for one person. I just want you to think of one person in your life who doesn't know Jesus, who needs to know Him more, who for whatever reason isn't in a relationship with Him. And we're not going to pray for them to come to Mount Zion. We're not going to pray for them to come to church. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in them coming to Jesus and finding salvation. Period. That's it. That's what we're going to pray for. And I've given you a simple one-sentence prayers that you can pray each day. I'm not asking a lot of time for you here. There's a scripture attached to each of those. You can read that scripture and pray it if you want. It's just 21 days to pray for them. Now here, I want to join you in praying. So here's the second part of the challenge. You can do this if you choose to or not. I didn't choose a little black book, but I have a little black book. In this book, through this year, because we've had different services as people have talked about people in their lives that don't know Jesus. When you tell me that, I write down their name in here. And then as I sit at my desk, I pray for them every day. And so, I want to join you in the challenge. If you're going to pray for somebody, I'm going to pray for them with you. And if it's 200 names, then it's 200 names. That's fine. I want you to bring them here. I want you to tell me about them. Just tell me their name. Tell me that you don't have to tell me anything about this situation, just their name. God knows everything else. That's all I need to know is their name. And I'm going to join you in prayer for them. You can email that to me. You can text me. You can tell me today. It doesn't matter. You can tell me halfway through. But I want to partner with you in praying for them. Why? Because they can't come to Jesus themselves. That's what we're saying. They don't know they need to come. And we're going to be like this Roman officer who says, I'm going to bring them to Jesus and I'm going to ask for healing for them because I know they need it and they can't do this. They can't do what I'm doing. So we go back to the verse and we ask, how does he ask for healing? He uses the word, he pleaded with him. That's what my version says. He pleaded. Now that word, when we hear plead, we think kind of like beg, right? That's what I think of. Like he's down on his hands and knees begging. That is not what that means. That is not what a Roman centurion would have done with a Jew. He would not have come and fallen on his knees like the leper did. But plead means to ask for help. And that word conveys that the Roman soldier knows that Jesus is the only one who can help with this situation. I got nowhere else to go to. I'm pleading with you because you're the only one who can help me help this young person in my life. So how does Jesus heal them? Well, Jesus offers to go to his house, right? He says, let's go heal him. And the Roman officer says, I'm not worthy of that. Now, I believe that what the Roman officer was saying is that's a bad idea. I don't think he truly understands or would say that this Jewish rabbi was greater than him, was higher than him. Everything in social status would say that he is greater than Jesus. What I do think he understands is this, that somebody like Jesus is not allowed to come into the home of somebody like him. And he knows, if you come into my home, that's bad news for you. And I'm not coming in here to disrupt what you're doing. I want you to be able to continue what you're doing. I'm not worthy of you, your whole ministry being disrupted for what I'm coming to ask. Then he says, I rule over soldiers, my paraphrase, I rule over many people, and I tell them to do things, and they do it, because I have authority. And I believe you have authority over this sickness. And you don't need to see him. You have authority, and you can tell it what to do, and it'll do it. He recognizes the authority Jesus holds over this problem, over this struggle, over this sickness. And so Jesus heals him from afar. He heals him and just says that he's made well. Now, what happens next? We don't know exactly what happens next. All we know is this. Matthew tells us that within the hour, the young man was healed. We presume that to mean that he was able to walk again and he was free from pain, because those are the two problems that we're told he has. Now, what's interesting is this. We might say that's all we know, but we know that somehow that story was shared, because Jesus doesn't go to the house. The disciples don't go there. We don't have anything about them exchanging emails or anything here. They don't see each other again for all that we know. But somehow that story was told. Matthew writes it as history. Not we think he was healed, but I know that he was. Somebody told them. Somebody saw it, whether it was that young man, whether it was the centurion, whether it was somebody else that was with him that day. Somebody went back and said, you won't believe what happened, told the story, and said, we went home and a young man was walking. He was healed. Can you believe what Jesus did? So when Jesus works that way in our lives, tell somebody about it. Share that amazing story of what he's done so that they know what he can do for them. So now we move to verse 14, third story. Last two are a little shorter. Verse 14 to 15, it tells us, when Jesus arrived at Peter's house, or might say Capernaum in your version, Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. But when Jesus touched her hand, the fever left her. Then she got up and prepared a meal for him. So they go to Peter's house, and Peter's mother-in-law is sick. She has a fever, which for them is a big deal. And so that's who's healed here, Peter's mother-in-law. And it doesn't appear that they know that she's sick. It doesn't appear that they're going to his house because she's sick. It appears that they just go to his house and they find her sick. So we ask, how did she come to Jesus for healing? She doesn't. Jesus kind of comes to her, right? But how does he come to her? He comes to her because Peter is in a relationship with Jesus, that when he comes home, Jesus is with him. And sometimes we bring Jesus to people, and we don't even know in that moment that they need him. We don't know about their struggles. We don't know about their heartaches. But because our hearts are in tune with Jesus, we bring him with us when we go. And the power of Jesus goes with us because of that. And he is able to work and move in people's lives because of our relationship with him. And their relationship with us as followers of him allows for Jesus to work in their lives. So how do they ask for it? It doesn't seem like they do ask for it, right? Jesus finds her sick and he heals her. How does he heal them? Well, again, he touches Peter's mother-in-law, much like the leper. And again, that's significant. In their culture, whether it was a Jewish culture, Roman culture, these women did not have a high social standing. And so a guy like Jesus wasn't supposed to put his hands on a woman like this, especially if she was sick. In fact, most devout Jewish men in Jesus' day would pray every day, thank you, God, that I am not a slave, a Gentile, or a woman. Now, that shows what they thought of those three classes, right? But it also shows this. Jesus healed the slave, of a Gentile, and then a woman. Because Jesus doesn't see them the same way that the world sees them. The world wouldn't touch them, but Jesus would. Those who are outcast, those who are looked down upon, those who are seen as lesser than, that's not how Jesus saw them. He saw them the way that God sees them, not the way the religious, devout people who thought they were holier than everyone else saw them. He saw them through different eyes. It calls us to see them that same way. So what happens next? Well, she makes dinner. Now, I'll confess that just saying that Jesus saw her differently than the world sees a woman, and then she goes into the kitchen and makes dinner, sounds backwards, okay? But understand what's happening here is this. What Matthew is conveying is, as soon as Jesus healed her, she was able to go back to her life the way that she was supposed to. She was able to go and do the things that she would normally do and become a functioning part of that household once again. Jesus has restored her and brought her back to who she should be. Again, Jesus isn't just concerned about taking away the sickness, He's concerned with restoring us fully and wholly. Last one, verse 16 and 17 tell us, that evening many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He cast out the evil spirits with a simple command. He healed all the sick. This fulfilled the word of the Lord through the prophet Isaiah, who said, He took our sicknesses and removed our diseases. So who was healed? Well, we see many people healed. First of all, it tells us many demon-possessed were brought, and then it says everyone who came to Jesus for healing was given healing. That is meant to convey this to us, and this is an important point. Because some people will read that and say, everyone who comes to Jesus for healing gets healed. We've already talked about how that wasn't true. This is not a contradiction to that. What Matthew is conveying is this. Jesus had power and authority over any kind of sickness or problem that was brought to Him. There was nothing that was brought to Jesus that He said, I don't know what to do with that. I can't do anything. I can't help you. He had power, He had authority over any problem that was brought to Him, any sickness, any struggle. Things that were incurable, He could cure. Things that couldn't be changed, He could change. No matter what was brought to Him, He could change it. He could fix it. He could heal it. Now, Matthew uses the word brought. That's how they were brought to Jesus. So people, again, we see people who could not bring themselves, but somebody else who could brought them to Jesus to find the hope and the healing He has for them. Now, the rest of the questions, how do they ask for healing? How does Jesus heal them? What happens afterwards? We don't know. This is kind of a generalization at the end of this passage, that Jesus heals all this thing. And Matthew gets to the point, though, and the point is that the point of this whole passage is for Matthew to get to this to say, in doing all this, Jesus fulfilled prophecy. Because Matthew is trying to convince Jewish people with his gospel that Jesus is the Messiah. And so he's trying to show through all this, just like we believe the Messiah could do, Jesus could heal every sickness and take away all these problems. And so the point of this last one is just to show who Jesus is to those people and to show us who He is. Now, I told you at the beginning we'd go back and we'd look and talk about the lessons we learned from them. But the most important lesson for us in all this, and there's a number of them, but the most important one is this. When Wesley, my son, was 7, he told me he wanted to be a cowboy. And that sounds pretty normal for a boy, right? 7-year-old boy. Now, I had a Lone Ranger kit when I was a little kid, right? Because that was my dad's favorite. So I remembered wanting to be a cowboy. So I responded the same way. You know, we went out and bought a holster with some 6-shooters and a rifle and all that kind of stuff. Cowboy hat, so you could pretend to be a cowboy. That's the normal reaction, correct? Okay. Let's suppose I had a different reaction. I suppose Wesley at 7 comes to me and says, I want to be a cowboy. He told me all kinds of things. He wanted to be a fireman, ambulance driver, policeman, everything under the sun. Everything a kid decides they want to be when they grow up, right? I want to be a cowboy. And I said, great. I want you to be a cowboy. And then, fast forward, Wesley graduates high school. He's 18 years old, and he comes to me and he says, hey, Dad, I'm going to college, and I'd really like help. And I say, I can't help you go to college. He says, why not? Didn't you save anything for me? And I would say, no. When you were 7, you told me you wanted to be a cowboy. So I bought you a ranch. There's horses and cows, and somebody's got to take care of them. You're 18 now, you got to move out. Time to go be a cowboy. Would anybody react that way? No. Why? Because as a parent, you know that childlike expression, that childlike question, that childlike desire isn't what's best for their life, isn't what they're going to want in the future. So what I want you to hear is that we often, when we come to God, we sound like a 7-year-old. And what we're asking of Him has such a short view of our future. We're only interested in what we're interested in right now. And we don't think about how that's going to impact everything else in our lives. So God doesn't answer every desire that comes to our hearts because it's not always in His will. He knows these desires, these childlike expressions, aren't what's best for us. And so He builds our life towards what we need, not towards what we want and ask for. Because He sees things in a different way than we do. Much like a father sees things different than a 7-year-old. So we have to pursue God's will and ask for God's will, because what that means is we're saying, I understand, I don't see and know everything. And I, in the midst of my problem, probably don't know the best answer to it. But I know that you do. And so I'm asking for your will to be done. Now it's okay to tell Him for what we think that should be. Even Jesus did that, didn't He? In the garden. Take this cup from me. Jesus didn't want to die and suffer. Yet not my will be done, but yours. He gave His heart and life over to the will of God. And the Father knew better than the Son in that moment. But the Son was willing to follow the will of the Father. And because of that, all of us come to find hope and healing in Jesus. So what else do we learn? I want you to take these things away. Simple things. Some of them, maybe just one or two of them, are really impactful for you. Number one, everyone can be healed. There's nothing that is beyond the healing power of Jesus. That includes people who are on the fringe. That includes people who are forgotten, people who are outcasts, people who we think God wouldn't want anything to do with, are precisely the kind of people that God moves in their lives. Whether Jesus, it was a leper, a Gentile, a slave, a woman, the demon-possessed, any kind of problem, any kind of person that would be rejected, Jesus accepted and healed and changed. Notice He doesn't accept them as they are. He changes their lives and restores them to who they should be and makes them new again. We see that some people have the strength to come to Jesus on their own and ask for healing. And we see some people don't. And it's our job and our discernment when we are well to know who we should be bringing to Jesus who can't come on their own. We see that our relationships with Jesus inherently bring Him to people who need to be made well. The closer we are to Him, the more people we'll bring Him to, just because He's with us wherever we go. We see that the attitude that we come to God with matters. That we should ask for healing with humility. That we should ask for it with faith in God's power and His authority. We should ask for it with trust in His ability to do what we're asking Him to do. We should ask it seeking His will and not selfishly or pridefully seeking our own. We should come to Him seeking Jesus as the only one who can give us what we truly need. We learn that the words we use don't matter so much. It's not what we say. There's not some magic bullet that if you pray this, Jesus will give you what you want. There's so many people who will tell you just pray this verse or just believe this verse, and if you say it, then God will do it. That's not how God works. In our heart that we come to Him with matters much more than the words that we come to Him with. What matters is what we understand about who He is and believe about what He can do. We see that there isn't some standard way that Jesus heals. He heals in many different ways. And that helps us to know that how you expect God to move isn't always how He'll move. What you expect God to do isn't always what He'll do. But He'll do what He knows is best. Because what we ultimately learn is this. No matter what, when you come to Jesus, His ultimate goal is to restore you. To restore your heart. To restore your life. He's not just seeking to heal sicknesses and illnesses. He's seeking to restore people to Himself. He's seeking to restore you to who He created you to be. I'm going to call the worship team to come up, and as they come up, we're going to close with this song that just proclaims that God is great. How great are you, Lord? And it's a song of praise. Because as we read and hear about these things that God has done in these people's lives, so many of you have experienced them in your own life. And you've seen God move, and you've seen God heal. And we can give praise to Him today and say, great are you, Lord. But the words also proclaim that God restores every heart that is broken. No matter what breaks your heart today, God wants to restore you to Himself. God wants to restore who you are and who He meant for you to be. And so the prayer for you today, even if you've overcome some of the sickness, there may be things in your past that still linger and still break your heart. He wants to make you whole again. You need to answer that question that we asked in the beginning with this way. If you can say in one word what it is you need more of in life, what's the word? Jesus. Because in Him you'll find everything else that you need. So as we sing this song, that you cry out to Him. If you need healing and you need hope today, and you have that strength to come to Him, I encourage you to come. The altar's open, and we'll pray for you. You got somebody who needs to be brought to Him today, and you need to carry, bring them. The prayer team will be in the chapel afterwards. You can pray with too. But don't leave here today. We're coming and asking for the healing and the hope that Jesus intends to bring to your life. May you seek it in Him today. May you find more of Him, and in doing so, may you become who He meant you, He needs for you to be. Let's stand and give Him praise today for who He is and what He's done in our lives.